a kind of a reverse Q&A where we want to actually take a bit of time to surface the experiences that you all had. And then towards the end, we would love to answer questions and chat. But I think both of these pieces bring up, that there's quite a lot of space to make connections. And I think it's pretty special that we got programmed together. Thank you to the programming team. And so our prompt for you all is, what did you think about? What connections did you make? Did you zone out at any point in time? What did you think about when you zoned out? Just what was it like? And I think that for me personally, it's just really helpful and interesting to kind of begin to generate some of the ideas that came up for people, which are inevitably very different. And in our experience, we usually do this after the performance. In our experience, everyone's a little bit like, doesn't want to talk at first, and then people chat a bit. And it can even just be a word. You don't have to be articulate. But we'd love to pass it over to you for a little bit to just surface impressions, feelings, thoughts, memories, totally, whatever's in your mind.
So it got very exciting for me when your voices sort of came into focus for me. I was aware of them, but then you were sort of doing more whispering, and I'm trying to work it out. It's complicated, all of that stuff. Sorry, having trouble with my breathing. But your voices were really beautiful when they came through. It was all very subtle. I'm interested to know how much you thought about your own voices, but that's for later.
I'm going to steal this. With both performances, my mind goes instantly to technique and just starting, because both of them are so fascinating to experience. But thinking about, how are you making, images for these lanterns that seem so flat but transparent at the same time? How are you working through all the different things in real time, and how are you planning for that ahead? So I can see how fascinating it is to dive into that. And same with the second performance. I play a lot of video games, watching something like Red Dead and seeing even like the ability to create such a vast world that we can explore both digitally and physically in the real world is amazing. But to be able to see the artistry behind it, and also see the way that we can use these technologies to experience different things in different ways, not always having to shoot the snake at the end or do something horrible, but use it to explore and reflect on things that we don't always have access to.
Pardon me, is it Madame Ferrari or Madame Blavatsky? So the history of esotericism parallels the history of science, doesn't it? And I am addressing all three of you. It seems like the intermixture of esotericism and quote unquote science is something that in some way is coming home in the 21st century, in 21st century science, which says if you believe it, it becomes real.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on your point about technique as well, because the entire time for both performances, like I knew about the history of Magic Lantern and stuff, but there was a certain moment when my rational brain switched off. And I think that's what you were kind of saying in the beginning. Like I stopped trying to say, like, how does this work? Or how did this, like, especially with the slides on the left, they were so fluid at some point that it just kind of took me away with it. And also as well, with Red Dead as well, that was the main thing. Like the first time it came up, I laughed because it's one of my favorite games. But then slowly this feeling of guilt started to come up. Like it was bubbling to the surface. And I think the next time I go to play it, I'm going to look at it differently. Thank you.
With hands with the technology. So thinking about your hands and then the technology, whether it's old technology or new technology, but how sort of the human hand interacts with that and how special it is to actually see that in real time, because we don't often get that opportunity these days.
I was thinking about liveness in relation to Rebecca. Is it your name Rebecca? No, and your name I forget. Kevin. Could AI have done it? Do we need humans? What are humans doing? Why is it live? What do we get from the liveness of both of the performance, especially because they're across such hundreds of years of technologies, hundreds of years, and like, why is yours live? But then why is yours live? And so liveness and deadness.
All right, I was thinking about rectangularity. Like the first thing was, never really thought about this, that the history of cinema started with circles or ovals. And I'm wondering if we'll ever escape the tyranny of the rectangle.
Hi, thank you to all of you for the performances. They were incredible. I was thinking about silent cinema a lot and the experience of multiple iterations and how those iterations change over time in different spaces that are shared with different audiences. I'm curious to hear from all of you what your experience has been in doing live performance and how that has changed over time for you in terms of storytelling, if we may use that word, or I guess documentary ways of narrating these spaces. I was also thinking of rendering as a word, rendering landscapes, rendering imaginations, and what the technologies that you use allow and help and aid in that form of rendering. And then thirdly, I was thinking about what live performance adds as an element. And for me, it's a certain dramatization, a heightened kind of aliveness, if you will, of being present. I think particularly in the last performance, the Are You Ready? Yes, no, maybe. That really dramatized a feeling of, oh, where is this work going? And might it fail? And what would happen if we have to receive that failure? It sort of puts a pressure on us as an audience in a way, or for me at least, in experiencing the work. So those were the three kind of things that I was thinking about watching both of these pieces together and seeing them share space.
I was thinking about hybridity. We began the festival talking about the avant-garde and the role of documentary practices. And so the idea of hybrid practices and how they might possibly be better able to reflect some of the complexities of our contemporary world, and also interdisciplinarity and this combination of perspectives from the sciences, humanities, fantastical elements, and how those might also be necessary.
Thank you for both of the pieces. I found them very fascinating. And while I was watching it, I was thinking about, because you were like two like duos of person interacting with each other. So I was thinking about rhythm and exchanging and conversation. And yeah, that's what I was thinking about. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for doing that. Should we move it into here?
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to start by thanking Anna, Alex, Melissa, and Emmett for the beautiful event we just all witnessed. And yeah, I mean, maybe a way that I am reading a lot of these questions and comments is this notion of the mystifying experience of process and also the demystification of process and experience, because while a lot of what we kind of like, or at least I experienced in this event, in this situation, was this notion of the kind of like how should I put it, the kind of mystical experience of cinema, and cinema in like kind of like maybe in a capital C kind of sense, where it's not just what is in the screen, but it's also the process of the making. I think that anybody who's ever held a camera and shot knows that there's something that happens, something very kind of innate and corporeal that exists in the moment. And I think that what we just experienced here was precisely that. We see the in situ process of creation that oftentimes gets maybe not relegated is the right word, but it's the first one that comes to mind, gets relegated to the camp of the making, which is oftentimes out in the world, and those relationships. And here with the phantasmagoria and with this experience of handling the relationship with also this netherworld that is maybe the game zone, or whatever we want to call it, this other creation, this other landscape, this other situation, and how they all kind of live in this kind of like singular opacity that is very complex and hard to put into words. But I wonder if there's maybe a provocation here that can begin the conversation of what does it actually mean to be in the moment. Yeah. For anybody.
I have a brief response to that, which is like, just now, all of the sort of performance anxiety and just washed over me. Like my face got flushed, and I was like 10 minutes late somehow. But I think that is, as a person, it's a privilege to be able to share things that you work on. And there's something rare and unusual and also kind of uncomfortable about presenting things in this way, where you're flirting with catastrophe a little bit. But I think a direct response to that is I was just noticing my cheeks filling with blood.
That makes me think about, I liked your comment where you were talking about failure, because I feel like failure is inherently built into my performance, at least a little bit. Like, it's never going to be perfect. And I try to embrace that kind of handmade nature of it. But watching your piece also, like, I like failure. I think failure is cool. And I did not expect to feel so much like I was watching people making a film, even though I knew you were doing live editing. But once you actually started, I was like, oh, wow. But I also feel that way a lot whenever I'm just like making a documentary, because at least when you're making research-based work where it's not personal, where you're not an expert and you're like making through the process of learning, which I feel like you also are doing in your piece. And I feel like I often have this anxiety of like, okay, at what point am I allowed to say that I know enough to make a piece about this subject? And like, there's always a little bit of a failure in terms of like, there's going to be some things I'm not including that I should include, or like, I wish I knew certain things that I know now when I made the piece. And like, when you have a kind of live performance where you are being very like overt about the imperfection of it, I think it allows you to kind of present it in that way. And I feel like a lot of films in this festival, generally, I appreciate how it's like there are as many questions asked in the film as there are answers, which I think is like nice as an audience to experience too.
I think, I think that this piece is interesting because I think my guess is maybe this is wrong, but in the past, it's like most people don't really know what we're doing. Is that true? Yeah, kind of. And I think that I guess I just don't totally know how I feel about that ambiguity. Our experience has been that it tends to run the gamut between some people thinking that we're not doing very much, and then like maybe that it's already all pre-done in some ways, or the opposite. And I don't know quite what to do with that thought, but like you had a introduction where you very much welcomed us into the process of this technology, and we didn't. And we've had the experience sometimes of that being very much pushing people away, and also sometimes very much inviting people in. And so I don't know I don't know quite how to answer that question, but just I think that, I don't know. I guess I'm just like that question of guided, not guided, in control, not in control. It's like related to the question that I asked you earlier today. I think for me is very much part of this experience. Yeah. Also, if anyone wants us to explain what we're doing, we would be happy to do that. Yes. Okay. I'll do that now. So this piece is fully live edited, and it's different every time. So, and I think one important thing to know, so Alexander is navigating within the game engine, and it's a virtual world inside there. And it's a 3D scan of a small area in the Badlands of South Dakota. And then I have a huge amount of clips, of both audio and documentary clips. And then I am editing, choosing them based on what we hear in the world, in the virtual world. And I think one thing that's important to know is that there's an element that we're not in control of, which is that there's, I don't know if you sort of understood this, but all of the areas that are illuminated are people walking around the landscape. And so you don't see their bodies, but wherever they physically are illuminates the land. So if you walk up to them, you start hearing them describing that place. And it's directly located. The thing you're seeing is the same thing that they were seeing, except it's a 3D rendering of the thing that they were seeing. But Alexander doesn't know what they're talking about in there. So he's moving around this virtual space, and he'll go up to one of these illuminated areas, and he'll encounter somebody talking about whatever they're talking about. So we don't know what we're going to hear. And so I am listening to what they're talking about. And then I'm going through this like large index of clips that we filmed, because we've also, this piece includes an installation and a feature film that are also being worked on. So it has just a ton of other documentary material. And I'll be like, oh, interesting, that person's talking about, what was an example? That person's talking about grasses. That reminds me of Milt talking about invasive grasses. Invasive grasses reminds me of settlement. And so then I start to build, I start to edit in that way. And so it's all very surprising for me. You know, I don't really know what's going to happen. And so for me, there is a large degree of failure, and not, just not really not knowing, like we have our little setup made, but I don't really know what's gonna happen. Is that clarifying? Any follow-up questions on how that worked? Yes.
Oh, no, we have one more question if anybody wants to ask it. I have a pending one, but if anybody wants to take it away from me, that's totally cool too. Any questions? Over there.
I had actually a two-part question to ask. If you could talk about the relationship of this work to your previous work on sound artists and the whole history of women in sound, and your that trajectory in your work. And my other observation is that I see this work as connected to, I think it's pronounced machinima, that film work. And it's interesting to see it here because Phil Solomon was very, very interested in that, and in that engagement with games and with virtual reality and with the introduction of an aesthetic commitment and energy and confrontation, sometimes politically, with the history of video games. And I think that since you're here, I don't know if you know his films, but some of the work that he did later in his life came out of that convergence. I guess I had 3 parts, but then I wanted to know if you'd seen the work of Total Refusal in Austria, because they're doing really similar live commentaries around nature and video games and landscape. So that's a 3-part question, but
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's interesting. So machinima, for those of you who don't know, is conventionally, I'm kind of narrowing it a little bit. Oftentimes, it's people who are artists, usually, who are using existing video game worlds in order to use them as a placement or like a context to make films, and also video game characters. And it came out of a tradition of conventional commercial video game companies kind of opening up, or in some cases being hacked by fans. Often is sort of where it started. And it's like you make films inside of these worlds. So in some sense, it's a little bit like stepping into a Hollywood set and kind of making your own film inside of it. This very much, well, technically this is related. I see it a bit differently in the sense that we went to this place and created the space. So it's not a reuse in the sense that machinima I usually think of being a kind of reuse or adaptation. I think of it a little bit in discourse with the technologies used for mapping and surveillance and kind of land satellites and Google Earth and that larger kind of mapping project, which if you look deeply and if you look in the present, is completely converged with the world of video games and virtual spaces. And so it's very much this sort of Borgesian map and territory discourse. And so it's a very nuanced difference, but I'm sort of familiar with machinima and see this subtly as a different thing. So that's the one piece, I think, of your question that I will answer for you.
Yeah, I wanted to say we've kind of run out of time, but thank you again to the artists. We're all around, so even my own lingering questions, I know that I'll tackle them outside of this space. It'll happen. So please feel free to approach anybody in the coming minutes. A couple of days left. I also wanted to say that this show today, the program was presented in partnership with Cool Boulder. And it's part of the Moving Creatures program, which is presented as a campaign and forming partnership between the city, local organizations, and communities addressing the climate crisis, biodiversity loss, nature-based climate action, and the existential questions that I think we all have here embodied.
May I say one thing?
Yes, go ahead.
We have a special guest here who is Juliana, who was one of the participants in that Augie world. Who shared with us her insight and experiences. So welcome and thank you for coming.
Lovely. Thank you. Yes. Thank you for being here. Stick around, everybody. See you around.